name's Chris Tallis, and I'm responsible for the professional services consulting teams within Rackspace, and my purview is one of movement. So we see a lot of organizations that we work with either in the process of trying to work out what to move and what to move where, or in the process of having started moving and gotten stuck, or in the process of completing their programs. And really what we wanted to do today, and I thought it would be quite useful for you guys to actually hear from some of the Rackspace teams that actually do the modernization activity with our customers. So what I'm hoping you're going to take away from today is a pragmatic and practical view of what to do with an estate, how to approach an estate, multiple applications, single applications, focusing more on the brownfield activity, so where there is already established estates. We'll come on to some greenfield new build stuff as well, but primarily what we're going to be talking about is the principles and practices of how application modernization can actually be brought to life. Okay, and the way we've broken it down, we're going to talk about the different types and categories of modernization, and what I'm hoping you'll see quite quickly is that essentially the term application modernization covers a number of different things. So we're going to start by looking at some of the more straightforward and less ambitious aspects of modernization, how that can be achieved, some of the things that we should be looking out for there, and then we're going to come on to looking at some of the more exotic options and the more technically intricate ways of modernizing applications. And then at the end, what we're going to do is just have a couple of minutes just to talk about how we actually do something with this information. How do we make it actionable? So I'm joined today by Christos and Pavlo, who are going to talk about this in a little bit more detail. So without further ado, Christos.
Hi everybody. My name is Christos Liotis. I live in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and I work as a transformation consultant at Rackspace EMEA Professional Services. And today I would like to talk to you about the theory and the context of application migrations, as well as where migrations meet modernization. So when we talk about migrations, except for the execution in the practical part, there are some fundamental principles we need to keep in mind. Preparation is equally important to execution, and by preparation we mean goal setting, application landscape analysis, source application landscape analysis more specifically, and categorization into move buckets in order to prepare yourselves to move to the actual practical parts, which are preparing your environment. And that means both your current environment, what we call the source, as well as the target landing zone, selecting your first mover application, one or more applications actually, and migrating them over to your cloud infrastructure, and then testing, monitoring, and optimizing everything until you achieve what you want. So I skipped through the first three, but I'm going to focus on them mostly. So the preparation steps, it all starts with understanding your problem, defining your problem statement, what you have at the moment and why you want to change, defining your business drivers and also envisioning where you want to go, setting the goals to achieve that, and also making sure you champion the upcoming change within your organization, because a migration is not only a technical change, it's actually maybe even more an organizational change. Making sure your teams and your people are aligned to that change is very important to kicking off a migration project and making it as successful as possible. So once you have done those, it's time to analyze. There you have to understand what you have in terms of applications. You need to know your application landscape, and that's the cornerstone of every successful migration project. When you know what you have, it's much easier to make the right decisions towards what you want to achieve, and those decisions will be informed. So having that full list of your application landscape will allow you to identify your migration candidates. And by that, I want to point out, we mean applications. We view that more on an application than on a server level, because for a migration, of course, is a migration of servers and infrastructure, but it's also applications, and a modernization even more is much more related to the applications than the servers. So once you have identified those migration candidates, then you can start categorizing into what we call the move buckets. This is pretty much defining the migration approach for each application. And to be a bit more specific, this is what we call the move buckets. I assume many of you, if not all of you, have heard about the 6 R's. Our view is a bit more on top of that. So what we have defined are the 4 M buckets: the move, modernize, maintain, and mothball. About the last two, these are the most self-explanatory ones. Maintain bucket will include all the applications you have that will remain in your source environment. They will not migrate. And mothball includes all the applications that are to be retired. The applications you don't need anymore, you're not going to migrate them either. So what we have here is 2 buckets that are not migration buckets and 2 that are migration buckets. There comes the question, move or modernize. So what are the differences between these two? Moving is pretty much what the word says. It's like for like migrations. You have an application in your source environment, you will have the exact same application on your target, with the only difference being your VMs running on a new infrastructure. There are 2 different approaches here: the new build and the image migration. By new build, we mean you're rebuilding your infrastructure on the cloud, on your selected clouds. You're spinning up new VMs, and there you deploy the same operating system, same database version, and same application version as in source. And there's also the option to do image migrations that will require the deployment of image migration tooling on your source and target environment, which will allow you to take a copy of your source server and move it exactly as it is over to your target environment. So as you can see, the move bucket, there is 0 level of changes, 0 level of transformation. Any level of transformation will put your application in the modernize bucket. In that, you have a lot of different options. You can have from small, simple modernization, such as uplifting your operating system or database versions, using a newer application version that's maybe even cloud ready, or going to something much more exotic, like embracing cloud native technologies, utilizing software as a service, utilizing DevOps. Anything that includes a modernization or transformation goes into this bucket. So I want to focus a bit on our key message here. The key message is that a migration and a modernization is not an absolute, it's a scale. And that scale, we view this at its levels in terms of amount of changes, effort, complexity, and areas of expertise. So starting from the lowest level of this dial, you can have a simple move. A simple move, as we said, is having exactly the same on your target infrastructure, with the only change being utilizing infrastructure as a service. That includes the minimum amount of change and effort, because the main effort involved here will be about redeploying your application and ensuring that, redeploying your application and of course building your target infrastructure and ensuring all your interfaces are reconnected. There are different levels of expertise needed here if you go for a like or for an image migration, but this is the simplest level of move. Now, when you start to do some transformation, some modernization, you can go into some higher levels, which we define as a simple modernization. And a simple transformation will have a bit more complexity, more changes, more areas of expertise required, and of course, more effort required. That can include any uplift of the operating system you have at the moment. For example, you're running Windows 2008 and it's approaching end of life. Well, it's past end of life now. You can upgrade this to a higher version. Database version upgrade as well. You can use a new application version, or you can even start utilizing platform as a service. In the simple modernization category, you always go for a reinstallation. So you start from scratch, you have a fresh application, either that being the similar application to your source one, or one that's not very fundamentally, but a bit different by utilizing platform as a service. But this is all simple modernization. Now, except for the simple world, there is of course the more exotic one, for which I will hand over to my colleague Pablo to talk to you about.
Hi everyone, I'm Pablo García Matamoros. I lead the DevOps and application modernization practice in Rackspace Professional Services for the EMEA region. And yes, Christos has been talking about the basic levels or simple levels of modernization. When we talk about a more thorough or a more realistic modernization of an application, is when we are actually touching the application and where we're going to start changing or refactoring. And that's where we go to basically the next slide represents what AWS has been talking about for a few years now. And do I have control? Christos?
Yeah, I gave you control of the mouse.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, so this this slide that most of you will recognize comes from AWS, and this is where we talk about basically the options. And Christos was talking about a few options in here, but we usually focus on refactoring and replatforming. The main concern there is how ready is your application to do one or the other. And what Christos was talking at the beginning is you need to plan ahead. You need to do the discovery. Many people think that, and for the last few years, Kubernetes is like, yeah, my application is modern, is running Kubernetes. And I've got a few examples of different situations where this has gone a bit south. But the first that comes to mind is a customer that tried just to modernize the application by chugging it into a Docker container and run it in Kubernetes. And it was a Java monolith, and it just takes them 8 hours to deploy. So that's a very good example of, yeah, that's not modernizing, that's replatforming, and in a very bad way. So if we start talking about cloud adoption journeys and how cloud native your application can get, we see it as a number of stages. And what we've seen is in all of these stages, it can go wrong. It doesn't matter how much time you've put in each of the previous ones. You have to take the right decisions in the right stages. And it doesn't matter that you're doing a simple modernization or an advanced one or a complex refactoring or a greenfield project. It all matters what you're going to do. And this is actually a case that we had with a customer that had a large team of engineers that were working on stuff. And again, web application, API backend, front end, async workers, something that sounds already interesting and already in line with what we're doing. Problem was that collaboration was a pain, and it wasn't moving forward, and every single change that they were trying to do was a problem. And just breaking the application down into services, and these services having them hosted in single repos, which is something that for many people seems like basically common sense, didn't come as common sense to this customer. And what we ended up doing is just helping them do this transition. And at the end of the day, we enabled them to go much faster. And as you can see, they had been doing all the right stages in 1, 2, and 3. And when they were trying to start iterating, when they were getting to the iteration stage, that's where they suddenly figured out that they had done something wrong in the past, but they didn't understand what or how. And this is where we came in and helped them out. And it can be as simple as how are you hosting your code, right? Where are you storing your code? But it can get really, really complex quite quickly. In other cases, what we had is a customer that was basically finance, and they had hundreds of apps and APIs, and basically there was a disconnect between leadership, and the leadership just wanted to do a very simple replatforming, a lift and shift, and keep running on VMs. And the IT organization said, no, we want to do proper modern approach to containers. And somewhere in between, the communications broke down. And with a very tight budget, suddenly they realized they couldn't do it. And they had to go back. The interim solution had to be found. Problem was they didn't, because it was all a bit of shadow IT, they couldn't do it, and they couldn't do POCs. And eventually it all broke down. And this was down all to basically almost every single stage. The decision was made to go to AWS, and the decision was made to, yeah, let's do a lift and shift. And they contacted us, and then the fight started happening, and one said one thing, the other said another, and one plan changed, and there was a massive scope creep. There was no POCs, and they tried to iterate from the beginning, and it all was a massive failure. The way they fixed it at the end was to basically start containerizing, because they had a lot of .NET code. They started migrating and refactoring .NET into .NET Core and containerizing it and running it. And that was the only solution long-term to modernize that they found. Short-term, they had to just lift and shift it. and they lost more money than they intended to save, and it was a realistically big problem. And one of the main things that we've seen is, and one of the best approaches that we usually see is the fact of going in and saying, hey, we want to do a greenfield. We want to maintain our business logic. We want to do, but let's do a slow approach. Let's make sure that we're planning ahead. Let's make sure that we chose the correct first movers, and let's make sure that we are not just trying to reinvent the wheel in one go. Let's make a slow but stable approach to modernization. Unless we have a massive budget and unlimited time, the big bang approach usually doesn't end up well. And that was me.
Fantastic, thank you guys. So I hope that gave you something of a view as to sort of holistically where we are at with the customers that we work with in the space of application modernization. And as a basic principle, I'm hoping you're taking away a couple of things. Firstly, it's not an absolute. You have to understand the applications. You need to understand where they fit on that spectrum, represented as a dial, as Christos pointed out. And it isn't just a case of one size fits all. You have to be sensitive to the form and function of the application. However, one of the things that I does sort of warrant a moment's attention in doing these levels of analysis and assessment work, and also as Pablo highlighted in the scenario where a customer is talking to us about a particular challenge that they have, we quite often find that it's as important to surface the first application in a timely fashion and get going as it is to try and prepare some form of construct that matches a customer's entire estate or their various numbers of applications. And there are some features that help us do that, such as understanding the criticality of the applications, understanding their topology, understanding their makeup, some of the target architectural considerations. But ultimately what it allows you to do is to compartmentalize the applications and then attach a certain form of behavior to it. And you saw that really from what both Christos and Pablo spoke about. So one of the key things we're quite passionate about is getting started. Choose your application and get going. And we heard a little bit about that from Trend Micro as well, who are advocating starting and getting started. And I think the reason it was very helpful for those guys to lead us out is because no matter how you do this or how you approach it, the aspects of security have to be forefront of mind for every single one of us. So whilst we advocate that, I think it's key to understand that there's some things that predicate it, security being one, and of course support from your business being another. If you're in the middle of starting or finishing a program of application modernization, doing so without business support and without support of the business users and the community surrounding those applications makes it an incredibly difficult thing to do. So sort out your stall, compartmentalize the applications, and then go at it, get your application, dismantle it, using some of the principles hopefully that you'll have picked up depending upon the form and function of the application from either Christos or Pablo. And yeah, hopefully that gives you a sense of how we approach application modernization and what we endeavor to achieve. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you very much. That was very insightful. I think it's interesting to have a European perspective on this, because what it tells me is that the world is pretty much the same from a technology standpoint. Organizations across the globe are dealing with these issues. I'm so glad that we're able to hear from our two opening speakers to say, look, you don't have to worry about security, but you just need to do it right, take advantage of our experts. And from a Rackspace perspective, there are experts when you're grappling with how exactly do I migrate these applications to the cloud. we've got experts who can help make sure that happens correctly, cost effectively, securely, all those great things. So very, very informative.